Are you a researcher or an inventor with a great idea and no clue of how to turn it into a business? Check out Eco Capital. They'll get it done. 90% of app ideas fail. If you don't want that to be you, check out Big Kitty Labs. They can help you be successful. Do you run a startup? Chances are your employees are underpaid. Give them the benefit that really matters. 614 Startups Entrepreneurs Brew. Email us today for details. Welcome to the 614 Startups Podcast, the entrepreneur's guide to launching a startup in Columbus, Ohio. 614 Startups Nation, welcome to another episode of the 614 Startups Podcast. I am in the building with my man, Nile Woodson of High Poke. What's up, Nile?
What's going on, guys?
The legendary High Poke, keeping it real wavy on Instagram.
I love that introduction. I wish I had somebody like you around every day to introduce me that way.
When you wake up in the morning?
Yo, now coming at you with the High Poke. Like, yes, let's go.
So I really love your brand. I'm exposed to it only digitally. I've never been to the restaurant. I know that's a sin.
Yeah, we got to change that.
We got to get in there.
Yeah.
But it's good to finally meet you guys in person, man.
Pleasure
Yeah, I really,
here.
really love what you're doing. I love your brand story, but you can tell the people that. So I start every podcast with a bit of the background. So your personal background, and then we'll get into High Poke.
Okay, great. Got it.
Shoot.
Go. Okay, hello. My name's Nile Woodson, born and raised in New York City.
What part?
Manhattan.
Okay.
Yeah, born in the West Village. Moved here. I went to City College up in Harlem. And in 2010, I decided that I didn't really know what I wanted out of school. So I wanted to get some experience before going back so I could really have a foundation to build on. And I always had this idea that I would own my own business someday. And my brother-in-law owned a product development industrial design firm. So I was like, hey, let me go work with him and just see what it takes to manage employees and balance the books and, you know, gauge where the business growth is and set, you know, goals, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what got me to Columbus. 2010, I was, you know, from the city. I decided I could only spend 4 months in Columbus. I was like, that would be the maximum amount of time I could be in the Midwest. And in fact, I fell in love really quickly. So I felt embraced. I loved the community vibe. I loved how connected people were. I loved how easygoing it felt here, yet there was this energy of creating and a lot of opportunity, and all of those things just really spoke to me. So 4 months became, 4-month internship became a year position, became 4 years at Ohio State to finish my degree in marketing, and that led me to opening High Poke. So throughout that duration, I served tables and decided that I just loved that. Like, I loved creating and facilitating experiences for people through food and conversation and ambiance and the environment and presentation and all of those things. And so that's kind of what led me to decide to open a restaurant. I ate poke in LA. It blew me away. I had eaten it earlier on in my life, but I didn't, like, nobody handed me a bowl and said, this is poke, eat it, you know? So it brought back some memories. It kind of brought me back into that space. I, in fact, was on Venice Beach when all this was happening. So I was like, all of these things just lined up and made sense. And I was like, okay, sweet. High Poke. We're going to bring poke to the Midwest. So
Right. Now, in most business circles, if you told somebody you were opening a restaurant, they'd be like, sit down. Don't open a restaurant.
Yep.
It's one of the hardest businesses to succeed at, both in the short term and in the long term. Like JC says, grand opening, grand closing.
Yep.
So did you have some of that feedback when you started talking about the idea that, hey, I want to open a restaurant? And what was that like for you early on?
100%. Even my business partner, Miko, is sitting in the room here. But even he looked at me and was like, you're crazy, man. You're going to do what? You're going to open a restaurant? And he didn't even know what poke was. So I got to like expand his thought process around it. Once he had the bowl, he was like, okay, I understand now. You know, I mean, poke is that good, but outside of that, really just presenting food in a way that people can attach to it. And it's not just a good meal. It's like something beyond that. And my passion for that always grounded me in, this is going to work. You know, it's one of the hardest businesses to succeed in. The statistics on how often these places close is outrageous. And so, yeah, all that is overwhelming. And you're right. A lot of people look at you and the eyes get wide and they like don't understand what's possessing this, vision or, you in that moment. And it's hard. It does get to you in a way. You're like, man, if everyone's telling me don't do it, this is insane, this is crazy, even though you're super passionate about it, maybe I should listen to them. That
because it's not cheap to get started either. It's not like you could halfway try to open a restaurant. Like you got to
do it.
Have to open a restaurant and then you'll find out if it's going to be successful.
Yep.
You can't tiptoe. Some people now, the model now is, hey, I'm going to do a food truck and then a food truck to a restaurant kind of deal. Was that you guys' process as well? Or did you go full-fledged restaurant and then get the food truck later?
So we did, in fact, get a food truck first and then a restaurant after. That wasn't always our intention. It just, once we kind of committed to it and figured out our first steps, it kind of just opened up a path for us that we followed and ended up having a brick and mortar. So I'd like to say, we planned it that way always, but we were just very open to the experience. And a lot of that energy brought things our way that facilitated us getting the brick and mortar. And one is in our vision. The number isn't clear, but more and regionally and outside of Ohio as well. Like we'll take this thing as far as it goes, as far as it makes sense. We're super committed to that. And yeah.
So seafood in the Midwest. Now, second point that somebody might want to stop you, just because you tasted poke, which is fresh fish in LA, how are you going to replicate that inland in Columbus, Ohio? So did you see that as a potential obstacle to doing what you wanted to do? Or you were just like, you know what, to hell with it, we'll figure it out when we get there?
I was just as, I would say, naive as most people. Even after I made the decision that not only was I going to open a restaurant, but that restaurant was going to be focused around poke. I didn't understand how the fish industry worked. I didn't understand timings of things, how to check freshness. I mean, I love fresh seafood, right? But like, what does that actually mean? I mean, in places like Japan, where everything is from the sea, they will catch a fish and then tell you not to eat it for 2 or 3 days because that's when it's the freshest. So from that perspective, you're like, wait, isn't it freshest when you pull it right out of the ocean? But fresh is this like concept that everyone thinks they know what it means, but it means something potentially different to everybody, So I didn't understand how a fish from the ocean ended up anywhere else. And then I was like, wow, there's these things called airplanes and they fly and they get stuff around really fast. So you could, get a fish just as fast from Japan to here as you could get a human in a flight, and even faster because there's like a massive industry behind this.
So there are all these delivery networks that you didn't know existed. Whereas if you from the outside looking in, you would think it was virtually impossible, but there are already routes that would facilitate it getting here and getting it here when it's quote unquote fresh.
Yeah. And even things like, I thought that once a fish had been frozen, that you could no longer consume it raw. But actually, industry standard is that every single fish that you eat has been frozen, that you're intended to eat raw, has been frozen at least once to kill any parasites. So it's like actually a part of the process. So even if you're getting fresh fish, it still has been frozen at one point, unless you have the luxury of like being the guy on the boat, pulling it right out of the ocean, cutting off a hunk and like, this is how it's safe in the industry.
Right. So basically you're eating defrosted fish.
Yeah.
Let's just call it that. What we describe often as fresh fish does not mean it was never frozen at one point or the other.
Right. And there's even different techniques of freezing. There's different speeds and processes that some people who are extremely knowledgeable about fish will say the qualities of a super frozen fish, which is like a funny name, but it's like this crazy process and you have to thaw it in a specific way. And like they say that the qualities of that in some fish are better than if you were to just pull it right out of the ocean. So like this just totally switches up most people's thought process and like things we think we knew or know, and then learning all this stuff about it. It's like, wow.
I'm going to flex on my wife in a restaurant now with my fish knowledge, like how wine snobs start flexing with their wine knowledge. Like, do you know this was once frozen before?
You're like, excuse me. Let me just...
All right, so now you figure out the whole logistics of getting fresh fish here. It's possible you guys have the truck. How do you start thinking about putting together a menu? Right, for people who have never had poke before to really have that poke experience.
Yeah, this is the funny thing is because when I was originally thinking about serving poke, it was just the tuna bowl. I was like, this is the only way to eat it. Everyone should be eating tuna, right? Like,
okay,
just
we didn't even define what poke was. It's tuna.
Yeah. So traditional tuna is traditional poke is yellowfin tuna, ahi, which means from the region around Hawaii. And because it's super plentiful there, poke means chunk. So like instead of getting culinary training on how to perfectly slice sushi, you kind of just chop it up and throw it with whatever you like, avocado, rice, sometimes in a salad, and it's got some sort of marinade to it. So it's like very loosely defined what poke is. It could be tons of things. Traditionally, yellowfin tuna.
Okay.
So my one was just one bowl, miso soup, green tea on a cart. That was like my original. And because I was an OSU student and I didn't appreciate what food was offered there. A lot of it's fried, fast stuff that wasn't healthy. So I was like, I got to bring this to campus. It'll just go bananas. But OSU doesn't really let outside food vendors bring food and serve it there. So that canceled that idea right away. Then it became a truck.
And so as you're thinking, though, so you want to start out with just the basics.
Yeah.
But then when you get the truck, did you feel that it was necessary for you to expand, or could you have gone Chipotle style, create your own bowl and you can have an infinite number of combinations? Or did you find that certain tastes just went better and you wanted people to have a certain experience when they thought about your brand?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Certain tastes go better. Our thought was that we had eaten a lot and tried a lot of different things, and this was the perfect balance of what we liked. And we didn't want anything to be kind of basic on its own. We wanted everything to have sort of its own personality. But when you mix everything together in the bowl, you get like a full-on flavor-packed bite. Like, so you want a little bit of everything in each bite. We built it to go together. That being said, if you don't like spice, you definitely don't want the jalapenos. But yeah, it started with tuna, and then vegetarians came up and they're like, what about us? And we were like, well, we can put avocado there instead of tuna and give you all the rest of the stuff. So then the veggie bowl was born. And then we were like, we got to try a different kind of fish. So then we did the salmon bowl, and now that we have the restaurant, we do different base options, and we're actually expanding the menu even further to have meat options and some different meals that aren't just focused around a bowl. So things are growing as we learn, as we get an idea of what people want outside of just what we know is good, then we slowly incorporate.
Right. Now, when you were thinking about building a business, I think there are two things that you guys do really well. Even though I haven't had the food yet, I hear feedback that you got to go here. The food is great. I think you guys were also thinking about brand. Now, a couple of things that I think about, you guys have the swag out there and all of that stuff, and I love your branding. And then you also have community, right? So you're doing yoga events there, and so you're building kind of this fellowship of people who not only enjoy the food, but they also engage with the brand and also engage in the community. Was that part of the strategy from the outset, or are these all things that kind of developed organically? Just like you said, the vegetarians came up and you added a veggie bowl, or you started to add other fish. Were you guys thinking this holistically, or has this developed organically as you went along?
It was it was definitely a super intentional maneuver to be heavy on the brand. And exactly how that happened for us wasn't always the plan. Like we just knew that you could have the best food in the world, But if nobody knows that you exist, you're probably going to go out of business. You know what I mean? So making sure that people knew who we were, what we were up to, what we were doing, that because this idea seems like it doesn't make sense because we're in the Midwest, or like sushi on a food truck, or all these things are kind of like go against each other. We were like, we want to be super transparent and show everyone all steps of the process, who we are, what we're up to, so that they can connect with us and what we're up to, as well as the ability to eat a delicious meal. And it will encompass, see, this is what takes just going to a place and having a good meal, from just being a good meal to being an experience, to being something that's memorable. Like if you don't live here, but you ate at High Poke, you're going to tell your friends when they go to Columbus to eat there. And when you come back, you're definitely going to go there again. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I had a good burger in San Francisco is different than you need to go to this place because it was super awesome. You know, like that's the difference of just a good meal and an experience. So branding, showing people what we're up to, as well as that we do offer something new and delicious that we love, was always a very intentional decision on our part.
Cool. And because of that, you know, the branding you guys executed so well that I know like 3 iconic things, maybe even 4 that are High Poke related that have nothing to do with food. So it's the swag, it's you guys' gear, which I think you guys do an excellent job of.
Thank you.
Is the dog. Whose French bulldog is that?
It's my dog.
Okay, the dog is legendary. It's like the High Poke. It's part of the whole brand and
mascot.
the whole feel. Yeah.
It would be better if he was a tuna, but you know, a little black French bulldog works well.
Yeah, it's pretty. He's pretty cool. You guys have the yoga that you do, and then you have these photos of customers who, you know, you're featuring your customers on your IG, and then that's the little wave icon in the corner. So there are so many things about the brand that I enjoy. Even though I haven't been to the restaurant, I already have an affinity for you guys. You know, I haven't tasted your food, but I really love what you guys are doing. So right now, for where you guys are in your business cycle, what are you thinking about next for High? What's the next step for you guys?
Yeah, we have a couple things going on. Some opportunities open, some close, you know, doors open and close and present new opportunities for us. So we're taking on a new endeavor. I can't really say what it is for like 6 more days or until 2019. But it's really exciting. We're super excited about it. It's different. And we're going to be incorporating it under High Poke. So some new items. In addition to that, we're broadening our menu to speak to more types of people. So somebody who might not like fish, but still likes the idea of an island vibe kind of a meal can come and eat something. So we have some meat options. We have some steamed buns. We have a breakfast menu that we're rolling out. So we'll be opening earlier. So we kind of have just taken everything that we've learned up to this point and are really starting to just fire off some new things, some things we've been thinking about, getting creative, trying different things on, because that's where the magic happens. You know, it's good to know what you know. And at this point in time, I feel like we know a lot about poke, but there's tons that we can learn. So like always looking at something with fresh eyes.
So let me, because this is curious to me, as you guys continue to expand the menu, there is such a thing as the paradox of choice. Meaning, I love a restaurant that it's curated for me. But at some point, I deal with this issue on some menus that no matter what I pick, I feel like I could have picked better.
Yep.
So how do you guys intend to deal with that as you add more menu items? Because I think that also impacts customer satisfaction. No matter how good my food was, if I walk away feeling like I could have picked the chicken or the other option, how do you guys intend to deal with that? Because that's a real phenomenon.
You know what? It's 100% real. And we've always kept things slim and simple so that we would avoid that, right? Like, you know what you know, and you know what you like to eat, and you can get it every time and enjoy it just as much as the last time. But there is also this thing about having options, and not so much on the side that you would have FOMO of like, what else could I have eaten on the menu, but just enough options to speak to enough people that it broadens the base.
And this is particularly even more pronounced if it's not a sit-down restaurant, meaning like when you walk up and let's say there's a line behind you and you have like what used to be 7 options, but it's now 15. You feel like, okay, I need to hurry because I'm wasting people's time, but I don't really know what I want. So I'm going to just pick something real quick and then go sit down. Yeah. So that's kind of another wrinkle in that you have to think about as well.
For sure. So we try to make everything that we incorporate menu-wise on some level interchangeable. Mm-hmm. So you could do this one thing, but you could also do it this way. So yeah, it does have more options, but it's everything kind of works together well. Mm-hmm. Like we're thinking about that. Like there's 10 things we could add that you could put in your bowl that would be great. But if you put all of them in the bowl, it's too much and it's no longer good. And then that becomes our problem. They're like, oh, they're not good. Even though the customer is the one who built the bowl, it's like, oh, I don't like high poke. Right. So we have it in a way such that if you were to do this same thing 5 different ways, you would still love it and enjoy it. But also we have one thing we're doing is having like signature options. So like these are options that we've chosen that we think are super good. And if you don't, maybe you start here and then you decide what you liked about that. And then next time you come in, you do the build your own with the things you liked, and then you try a few new things on. So that's kind of the vision for it. But we've never had more than like 3 or 4 menu items. So we don't really know. We're just going to do it and feel it out. And the most important thing about that is not pretending like we know everything and just being super open to the feedback. Like if enough people tell us they really love this thing and they don't love this thing, or we should try this or change this, like we're going to take that feedback and incorporate it and be very transparent with people in that process. Because that's what establishes that community. Because they're like, man, I really feel like I'm a part of their menu development, as opposed to us coming out and saying, we've got the best menu, it's brand new, like here it is. Like, hey, we've got some new items, we're super excited about them, but we need your feedback to finalize it, you know?
So there's so many things to think about with a restaurant. You got to think about location, of course. You got to think about menu pricing. You got to think about menu items. You got to think about cleanliness. You got to think about the food inspector.
The staff.
That's what I was about to get to. So one of the big issues is turnover of staff in the restaurant world. What was your experience early on? And what are some things that you think you've done well in order to kind of deal with that issue that inevitably happens to most restaurants?
I think because we haven't done things the way that most people would do things in terms of like opening a restaurant, or our process is different and how we feel about the restaurant is different, because we are both marketing majors and we're super focused on the brand as well as having really good food. I guess what I'm trying to say is because we do things differently, we have experienced sort of a different set of problems or issues. One of them has not really been staff turnover. Like all of our staff right now have been on pretty much since the beginning, and they love it and enjoy it enough that it keeps them around. It's also not like a super hard or serious job. So a lot of them are students or even have like another job or yoga teacher training or something that they're working towards that they're very passionate about. But this is a great income generator.
Supplemental. Yeah, exactly. Kind of thing along with what they're doing.
So we haven't had an issue with turnover. But then there's this saying that's like, it's not hard to find labor, it's hard to find good labor. And that is something that's real, because at this point, we're more inclined to take somebody who has 0 restaurant food service experience at all, because the actual food side is very simple. We're more interested in personable people. We're more interested in people with outgoing personalities, who are high energy, engaged, who learn quick and can talk to you about something, as opposed to just make it good. You know what I mean? That's more, and that comes back to the experience, the brand piece. Like, this is what's important to us, so we want to package that in a way that you can understand it and personalize it and then still deliver that experience to the customer.
Right. Now, I'm going to drag you out into some deep waters here.
Let's go.
Using a seafood analogy, right?
Yep.
Now, you could plead the fifth on this issue, or you can answer, okay? Mm-hmm. So there's a discussion around living wage. And usually people who are not in favor of the living wage hold up the restaurant industry as kind of their shield for why they advocate against the living wage. So in Columbus, I think it's about $15, maybe a little bit higher. What would a living wage initiative, not you speaking for Hype, okay, but let's put your business personally to the side. Let's just talk about, in general, the restaurant business. What do you think the impact of a legislative push would be? Because we're all part of this community. One of the great things about Columbus is our standard of living and cost of living, right? Some of the things that you have in LA with certain initiatives actually trickled out to everybody, where everything starts to escalate in terms of price. And we lose one of our key things that attracts people here. So from your perspective, living wage and the restaurant industry, how do those two things interact, and how would it impact a restaurant, even if it's just a hypothetical one, not necessarily you guys?
So let me just get clear really quick. Like living wage, as in you said $15, but what does that mean exactly?
Right. So let's say for restaurant workers, period, anybody living in
how much they need hourly to live.
Yes, let's say the hourly goes to $15 for everybody.
Okay.
How would that impact the restaurant industry, Hype, okay, or whoever that's part of this industry?
Yeah, so while the immediate thought is things will get more expensive because we have to pay people more. But really, at the end of the day, in a restaurant, the general formula for success is 30% cost of goods sold, 30% labor, and then 8% for your rent. Like all these things, they like add up. And then at the end of the day, if you get 10 cents on a dollar, that's like a very profitable restaurant. So in terms of when I think about a number, I don't actually think of the number itself. I think of the percentage. So you have to make the cost of your food or like price of your bowl fit that formula. So if labor goes up, then naturally you're going to have to either get creative with your cost of goods sold, or get a cheaper rent, or pay less for paper products, maybe, like all these things, maybe pay less for your marketing budget. So you can add and flex these numbers a little bit to accommodate something being higher. Like 8% is the ideal rent for a restaurant, but it's not uncommon for restaurants to pay 12 or 15% of the total revenue for rent, because they chalk that up to the placement of the restaurant. And that is marketing factors. So you can say, well, this additional 5 or 7% is actually being thought of as marketing, even though it's still rent. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah. And so you would have some wiggle room potentially if you've always been mindful about controlling costs.
Yes.
So you have to build in some contingency that around the corner may be such a increase in the wage that you would have to reflect, and you maybe don't want to pass it on to your customers necessarily. You've built yourself enough wiggle room to handle that increase as a percentage of your overall cost.
Yeah. And also, I mean, there's a gold point where you're serving so many people that you can't have more staff. So that caps your labor cost. Mm-hmm. And, the variable is the food cost. But like, if I can only fit 4 people in my restaurant, server wise, we need to be able to handle high volume, because I can't add 5. Does that so like that's kind of becomes capped.
Yeah.
And if we keep taking orders, now all this money is like almost thought of without a labor cost at all.
Correct.
So the key to that is, if more people eat in the restaurants, hopefully because they're making more money, that the revenue will go up enough so that all the restaurants will hit that gold point, and then prices don't actually have to change.
Understood. And you see, that's why I think podcasts like these or conversations like these are valuable, because we can actually start to talk about nuance. And I think when we talk about things that are, kind of third rail issues in our society, you usually have talking heads on either side, and the people who would actually be impacted by it, the small business owner generally that you would be most concerned about in the short term, it's more nuanced than that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it could be a good thing, but it can't go too far because then it would throw the numbers off. And so there has to be a little bit of give and take.
Right.
It's not maybe a jump directly to 15, but it's a gradual scale up so we can see the impact and, so we don't overshoot the mark and then have a negative impact.
Exactly.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So long term, what do you want the impact of high poke to be?
So I would like to show, I'm only 28 years old. My business partner is 27. We started this when we were 24 and 25. Fresh out of college, neither one of us knew what we were going to do. So, the impact I'd like to see just through my passion and efforts and energy is that it's totally possible. Like anyone can do anything that they want. They just put their mind to it, commitment, passion, and creativity, and there's opportunity out there. So that's like just the intangible impact that, go for it. Mm-hmm. Outside of that, like healthy, fast food. It doesn't have to be fried to be fast, breaking people's perceptual barriers, like raw fish in the Midwest, those don't work out, or sushi on a food truck, or, those sorts of things of just really not so much going against the grain and being disruptive, but going against the grain and being disruptive and then doing it well so that people see that there's actually opportunities past the perceptual barriers that have been placed on us from culture and society, religion, politics, all of these things. We decide things that seem concrete, and actually, if you just shift your perspective, it might be paper thin,
Mm-hmm.
So just getting creative and going for it, going against the grain, doing it good so that people are like, oh, actually, that was a good idea. Because if it was bad, if the fish was awful, then they'd be like, duh, I told you sushi on a food truck was a bad idea. I would never have eaten there.
Right.
But if it's good, they're like, holy moly, you totally flipped my brain upside down.
Yeah. Awesome. Nile, thank you so much for joining us today. And like we close out every podcast, I have my one takeaway. And my definition of brand is it predisposes you to making a purchasing decision. Listen, I haven't touched your food. I haven't been in your restaurant, but I'm predisposed to purchase because you guys worked on the brand. 614 Startups Nation, thank you so much for joining us on another episode. It's been my pleasure. Peace. Thank you so much for joining us on the 614 Startups Podcast. My name is Elio Harmon. Episodes of the podcast roll out every week at www.614startups.com and on iTunes. Don't forget, follow us on IG and Facebook at 614 Startups. Peace.